No. Show you the money.
Not show you. Show me the money.
Show me the money.
Yeah. Louder.
Show me the money.
That's it, brother, but you got to yell that shit.
Show me the money.
I need to feel you, Jerry.
Show me the money.
Jerry, you better yell. Show me the money.
Welcome to the Odds Breakers, number one place for shared, sharp betting information.
Welcome back to podcast 25 of 2020. I'm your host, Kiev O'Neill. You can follow us on Twitter at The Odds Breakers. Follow us on social media / The Odds Breakers. This episode is being brought to you by jazzsports.ag for a 50% bonus. Please visit Jazz Sports and use the promo code ODDSBREAKERS. Terms and conditions apply. If you would like to help us out with our costs and sponsor the website and podcast, we would love to help you out. Please visit theoddsbreakers.com and click shop and become a member. For $17.99 a month, you can get my plays and premium plays before the line moves. Also, some access to some Odds Breakers pages. And if nothing else, please visit theoddsbreakers.com and become a free picks newsletter subscriber. Big weekend in horse racing, my friends.
Oh, yeah!
The Arkansas Derby has been rescheduled to this weekend. We have lots of races, lots to talk about, and there is nobody better than to bring back two of the most well-known horse racing handicappers, Mr. Chris Fallica from ESPN and Marco D'Angelo from Wager Talk. Before we get into these races, I want to say a big thank you to all the first responders and essential workers out there during this COVID-19 crisis. It must be extremely stressful to have to consistently perform for people at a much higher level than you had before. You know, and when I say essential workers, first responders, it's not just the medical field. Huge thanks to them, of course. Imagine what they are going through. But it's also the smaller people out there working the grocery stores, working in delivery, working at restaurants, trying to keep everything afloat while we sit there and complain at home. Want to give a shout out to my man Eddie. He was one of the first handicappers that came on the show 3-4 years ago when we started. He is also, besides a handicapper, a FedEx driver at Eddie Has Winners, and he has been working 70 to 80 hours a week, 6 days a week, just because of the overload in deliveries over these past months. You know, he reached out to me just to see how I was doing the blue through all of this. Super nice guy. Huge shout out to him. Thank you for all of your hard work. And once again, thanks to everyone out there that has done extra and has put up with this as long as they have. For all of you that have had some hardships, I really am hoping and praying that it turns around, and we are thinking about you. I believe that we are approaching a breaking point where things are going to start looking on the up, and we're going to start moving forward once again to try and get back to normal.
You made us believe, put clothes on our backs, you sacrificed for us. You the real MVP.
All right, we have a lot to cover here, so without further ado, let's bring in our guests. Now I'm very happy to welcome back some heavy hitters in the sports betting and horse racing world to help us out this weekend at Oak Lawn Park. You know them as Mr. Marco D'Angelo from WagerTalk.com and Chris Fallica from ESPN's College Game Day. Guys, thanks so much for taking the time today to come on. Really appreciate it. Not a hell of a lot going on except the horse racing handles have absolutely been amazing. How's life been treating you guys during these crazy times?
No problem. Like we joked just before we went on air, the weather's finally turned hot here in Vegas, and poolside, a couple adult beverages by the pool, and daily racing form, and TVG's getting me through the days.
And Chris, what's the temperature up there?
Right now we got a nice 42-degree gray drizzly afternoon here in Connecticut, and we saw the sun a couple of days on Monday, and I don't think we're supposed to see the sun again until Saturday potentially. So that's been the one. Honestly, it's kind of a blessing and a curse at the same time. Where the blessing is, we're supposed to stay inside and not venture out a lot, and the weather's been cool and rainy. And so we really haven't been tempted to, but at the same time, you're kind of sitting here and you'd love to at least be able to look out and see some signs of spring and some nice weather, kind of make a dreary situation right now a little bit better. So just surviving it, kind of like Marco said, no poolside, no nothing of that right now for me in Connecticut. But TVG and the ADW online has been fired up regularly.
Well, it's kind of like my eating problems right now. It's like, this is the time you're not seeing anybody. You should be dieting, yet you're stuck inside. You have literally nothing else to do. So you're kind of balancing your beer intake and your food intake at the same time. So I kind of get your, with the sun there. It's not like, you can go out and do a ton of things anyway. So that makes total sense, my man. Well, anyways, we had a big NFL draft last weekend. I had a lot of fun with it. Marco, what did you think about the draft as a whole? You feeling good about the Steelers?
Well, the Steelers, they filled some needs that they had to get. They picked up Chase Claypool, gives them depth at wide receiver out of Notre Dame. Happy about that. Got a little extra insurance policy at the running back position, where, James Conner the last 2 seasons been great, but he's also been a little bit injury prone, and they got a guy that's got breakaway speed. That's something we haven't had in the backfield. So happy with that. They picked up a pass rusher. But I got to say, guys, the one big elephant in the room for the Steelers, this season is Ben Roethlisberger. One, is he going to be 100%? We're just assuming and wishing the best, off the injury that he comes back good. And what I wish they would have done is picked up an insurance policy. And I think that there's still a couple, veteran quarterbacks out there that, maybe they could make a play at for a backup. And I know it's going to sound silly, but that's off the board now. But I wouldn't have been opposed to bringing Jameis Winston in as a backup for the Steelers. That's something that, I would have went with, had that, because as good as the Steelers played last year with, let's face it, no offense at all, that defense carried that team to almost making the playoffs last year. If they had any offense at all, they would have made the playoffs. And I really think that this is a Super Bowl contending team if Roethlisberger comes back and stays healthy the whole season. But I'll throw one more name out there that maybe, the price might get cheap enough if nobody's interested, and depending what the Bengals decide to do. But Andy Dalton would make in my opinion, a hell of a number 2 backup.
I agree.
Well, with Dalton, the word of his release pretty imminent there. I would think Dalton would be a guy either for the Steelers and the Patriots and the Jaguars. And who knows what's going to happen with Cam Newton? I mean, this is a guy who, when he's healthy, can still produce. And you hit on it with Big Ben. Like, this is a guy a couple of years ago was talking about, I'm only going to play a couple more years, thinking about retiring. And with the injury that he went through last year, I mean, there's no guarantee that he comes back close to 100%. So I wonder if Mike Tomlin and the Steelers would take a look at bringing in Cam potentially, if Cam was certainly open to going to a winning franchise and a team that he potentially could get an opportunity to start for maybe down the road if he didn't necessarily want that starting job right away this year.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I actually had Andy Dalton higher than guys like Nick Foles. I was kind of hoping the Bears were going to go after him. Jameis Winston has got a ton of talent. He made some mistakes throwing picks, but his secondary was so bad, he had to take a lot of chances last year. And I thought that, the way some of his passes he did complete were pristine. Evans was running for a lot of touchdowns there. I mean, I think he threw 5,000 yards or something last year. It was pretty high. I can't remember exactly what it was. It was his interceptions that was bad, but I agree. Jameis Winston and Cam, unfortunately, with this virus going on, he can't really work out for anybody. And, people are just kind of speculating. Unfortunately, his price is going down and down as the days go. But I agree. I think the Steelers definitely need to pick someone up here. That was my biggest thing in the draft. I'm like, why are you trusting Big Ben after being a year off? And, Mason Rudolph wasn't getting it done either. So 100% agree there. Switching to college football quick, Chris, I must say ESPN's been actually pretty nice to the Wisconsin Badgers lately. Not only did they have them win their simulated NCAA tournament, they're top 6 in ESPN's FPI, man. And what's with the change of heart there?
Well, I think it's probably. I went over into the office before this all broke out, and I kind of tweaked the formula a little bit and gave the Wisconsin simulation a bump there for you, just for you.
Oh,
but I did
that's so nice.
but knowing what goes into that formula, the fact that you've got the quarterback position returning, and a lot of the analytical measures on offensive and defensive efficiency, how they were so strong in that last year, and how 2 of their losses last year came against Ohio State, it does make a lot of sense that they would be viewed very favorably in our preseason FPI. And again, that Big Ten West is. I remember we were talking last year before the season about how you could probably make an argument for anybody in that part of the division, outside of maybe 1 or 2 teams to win that. And we had thrown out Wisconsin, we had thrown out Minnesota as an option. People like the other teams in there as well. So and people like Nebraska was a trendy team, but I'm curious again this year to see how that Big Ten West shapes out. But going into the year, I certainly think Wisconsin is definitely the most talented team in that Big Ten West.
Well, that's good to hear, and I have them. I don't even have them in my top 6. I have them 7th, so huge difference with it. But there you go. I actually have Auburn higher than a few other people. I don't know if you have a top 10 yet, Chris. I have Auburn like at 4th or 5th, I believe. I'm higher on Auburn and then lower on Texas A&M in general than most of the handicappers out there. So, do you have a quick rundown of your top teams?
I don't necessarily have a top 10 per se. I mean, it's pretty obvious. You got Alabama, Ohio State, and Clemson and Georgia would certainly comprise my top 4. I do think this is a year where Georgia finally could break through and win the SEC with Newman. I mean, how he comes in after arriving late, the transfer from Wake Forest, and a little bit of a new coaching staff. That could be a little problematic. They go to Alabama early in the year if the schedule plays out as it is. But again, you lose that game still, you still get another opportunity potentially with the Crimson Tide in the SEC championship game if you beat Florida in the cocktail party. It's interesting to hear your opinion on Auburn and A&M because I'm actually a little higher on A&M this year. You look at the schedule that they had to face last year, facing Alabama, facing Georgia, facing Clemson. And I think this year from the SEC East, they lose Georgia and they pick up Vanderbilt. So that's a massive win in terms of the schedule. And I think finally in year 3 under Jimbo, they finally probably have closer to the talent level of some of the SEC West powerhouses. I don't think they're an SEC West winner, but I do think last year where the hype was there. For the Aggies, it was probably a year premature. I think the Aggies will certainly put up a much better record this year than they did last year.
Anything to add on that, Marco?
No, I have a question for Chris. I wanted to see what his thoughts are. Obviously we're in a situation with the virus and everything that everybody's on a lockdown. Of all of the sports, would you say that college football is the one that's going to be the most vulnerable to move forward and have a season? Because, we're talking about with the pro sports and having, no fans and stuff. And obviously that can be done because the TV contracts are so great that they can put that product on and still make money. But for college football, outside of once you get out of the Power Five and the big money contracts, the colleges need the fans to support the game. Do you think that we will have a full schedule?
I think at some point this fall we're going to have, or this calendar year, I should say, I think we're going to get some college football. But I agree with nearly everything you said about college football being the sport that could be the most, I don't want to say damaged, or the most vulnerable to what's going on right now, because attendance has already been dropping. And I think there's going to be a lot of hesitation by schools to play these games without fans, because the last thing these schools are going to want is to give fans a reason. Here's what it's like to stay home on a Saturday and not spend X amount of money on tickets and X amount of money on concessions and stay sitting in a parking lot for 3 hours after the game trying to get out. It's pretty nice sitting at home watching a whole bunch of games on your TV on your couch and having your friends over. I don't think colleges are going to want fans to be tempted by that at all. So I think they're going to want to play these games with fans. And then you hit on it as well. Just the geographics of college football, where you look at a conference like the Big 12, and you've got teams in Texas to West Virginia, and the travel and which states are going to be still under potential lockdowns or quarantines or something. The travel involved is going to be difficult. Could you have just complete? Could a conference like the SEC, where most of those states are opening back up now, say, hey, we're playing, show up, and then there are other conferences that aren't going to play. Do you want to just play Power 5 conferences? And if you do, where does that leave Army and Notre Dame, who are independent? So there are so many different layers to college football that it certainly does make the 2020 college football season one that could be really just a mishmash of a whole lot of different, really good, bad options.
I agree. I'm hoping that we have a full schedule, but I think if baseball is going to have to tell us a lot what they're going to do. I think when they come out, and whether they have 0 fans in the beginning and then kind of bring fans in but have them spaced out in the seats, or however they're going to do it, it might be a model for what happens in the future. So I'm kind of crossing my fingers on that one.
Yeah.
And
one other thing while I was sitting here too, in response to what Marco was saying as well, and you asked what do I think will happen, I was going to say I think the most likely scenario would be a shortened season, maybe started a month or so later, and you get rid of the non-conference games. But at the same time, what does that do to a lot of the FCS type schools who rely on those money grab games where Murray State or whomever's going to Alabama and getting $900,000 to go lose 52-3? Like that's completely damaging not only to those schools' athletic programs, but their whole entire school in general. So I don't know if that's necessarily the best of the bad solutions either.
Yeah, it's crazy to see what's going to happen. Just hope and pray that this thing goes away. People remain healthy here, and obviously we can somewhat get back to normal life, which is sports and everything else that people do to pass the time. So great points there, guys. Lastly, what I want to say about Newman, I just want to he came from a very fast paced offense. I'm curious if Kirby Smart's going to try to pick up the pace at Georgia, Chris, to match some of his skills and what he's used to for his 1-year rental. Real quick, anything on that?
Yeah, I would agree. I think the coordinator change that they brought in will allow for that to happen. And I also think it's going to be a good fit for Georgia in a sense that the Bulldogs do lose a couple of key contributors on that offensive line. Now, look, they still have a ton of great players up there, but I think if their offensive line is not near the level that it was a year ago, the ability of Newman to run and avoid some of that pressure, I think you might see a lot more quarterback run as a potential staple of the Georgia offense next year.
Any quick plays, Chris, you want to throw out there if we do have a full 12-game season or a future that in college football?
I had done a column on ESPN.com a few weeks back when Caesars first posted some win totals and some conference title odds. I'll give you the quick little cliff notes. You can hunt it down on ESPN.com and give it a read if you'd like. But Clemson to win the ACC, I thought was a no-brainer at minus 600. You potentially could get whoever the underdog is in the ACC championship game, play a little back on the money line there if you wanted to as a bit of a hedge. I thought Iowa State was to win the Big 12 at 10-1 was a good bet. I mean, Iowa State is a team that has lost a lot of close games the previous couple of years. They're 6-11 in games decided by 6 points or fewer in the last 4 years, and 4-8 by a field goal or fewer. So you would think that they're going to get a little bit of a reversal, a little bit better luck in some of those games. They do have to go to Stillwater and Austin, but this is a team that easily could have won in Norman last year. They very easily could have 3 top 15 wins last year in Iowa, Baylor, and Oklahoma. So they're close. I thought the price at 10-1 was pretty good on Iowa State. Ohio State to win the Big Ten at 140. I think Ohio State clearly has the most talent there. And I hit on Georgia a little bit. And I thought Boise State can win the Mountain West. It's a conference that I think is in a lot of flux right now. Some coaching changes, a lot of personnel changes at Air Force as well, who I think was the second best team in that league last year. I think Boise is head and shoulders above in that conference. If you weren't going to get them last year with a freshman quarterback and a freshman running back, you probably aren't going to get them for the foreseeable future. And I thought Ball State to win the MAC at 8-1. Ball State, a team that's probably going to have the best back seven defensively in the MAC and returns most of its offensive production. So I thought the Ball State might have been a team. Win totals that I liked. I liked Coastal Carolina over the 4.5. They were 5-7 last year, and I think the schedule is very amenable to repeating a 5-win season this year. Arizona under 4.5. I think winning 5 games for the Wildcats is going to be very tough. Remember, this is a team that last year went 4-8, and that included wins over Texas Tech and UCLA at home. They have to visit the Red Raiders and the Bruins this year, and both of those teams should be better than they were a year ago. I think there's a really good chance the Wildcats go 0 for the road in the Pac-12, and then they got USC, Oregon, and Arizona State and Tucson. So I think 5 wins is going to be hard to come by for ASU. Purdue opened at 5, and I like the over there. I think it's been bet up to 5.5 since then. But again, if this team under Jeff Brown doesn't win 6 games, I would be very, very surprised. Wake Forest, who I had mentioned with Jamie Newman before, their opener was bad. Their opener was a bad 7, and I think that's been bet down to 6.5 as well. I'd still be leaning towards under 6.5 as well. But you look at the Geeks; they're going to be underdogs at Miami, at Florida State, versus Notre Dame. Not at Miami, rather at Florida State, at Louisville, Notre Dame, Clemson. They're going to be underdogs. If they lose all those games, they're going to have to win out basically to beat you, and that includes games App State, Duke, Miami, NC State. So there are a lot of losable games for a team that loses a ton. And then Kansas under 3.5. We were Kansas was talked about in a positive light last year for the first time in a long time. But now comes the hard part, improving on a 3-1 season from a year ago, with basically starting over at the quarterback position, starting over on defense, and again a Big 12 schedule that on the road could lead them over the Big 12. So Kansas under 3.5 was the last of my total plays.
Well, look at that, Marco. We don't have to do any research anymore. We're done with we got it down. So no, I actually agree with a lot of those. I took a lot of those too. I want to throw a quick one out there. I like the Ohio Bobcats over 5.5 wins, and I like it because you look at their return in production on offense, it says 50%, but that's only because they lost their quarterback, who was their main running back for in Rourke. And he was also their pass thrower. If you look, they actually return 8 or 9 starters there, and they kind of a dink and dunk offense. I think Drew Kensel is going to do just fine in filling in that role. They have very easy games to win. NC Central is their first game. That's a winner. They have to go to Boston College, which is probably a loss. Then they get Marshall at home, maybe a win. At Texas State, home against Eastern Michigan, home against Bowling Green, at Kent State, and then their tougher games are at Miami, Ohio, at Central Michigan. They get Buffalo at home, and at the end, where you're going to get 6 or 7 wins at least, as they play Akron at home. So I like Ohio over the 5.5 right there. All right, well, let's move on, guys, to what we came here to talk about, the ponies and the Arkansas Derby. It looks like everything is split up here a little bit. Marco, what's going on with the Arkansas Derby, and why is it on May 3rd?
Well, obviously because of COVID-19, so many racetracks were closed, and Churchill Downs was one of them. The Kentucky governor, shut the racing down, so we didn't have the Keeneland meet in all of the different prep races that we have across the country. We lost the Wood Memorial, the Bluegrass, the Santa Anita Derby, and one of the big prep races always each year is the Arkansas Derby. And since Oaklawn was still racing and their meet was going to go through this date, they decided to move their race to the first Saturday in May. This would have been the prep race, one of the big prep races. It has become the major prep race this year because we don't know what the status of the other races are going to be. So we ended up with 2 fields, and this is something that we weren't sure they were going to split the divisions, and more importantly, if they did go with 2 divisions, which is a first, how would they award the points? Well, you know what? Bob Baffert, is one of the most successful trainers out there. And in racing, you need to have a good foundation, and you also have to have some luck. And for Charlatan, everything's rolling his way right now, because if they didn't split and go to 2 divisions, he wouldn't even have gotten in, because he has no stakes earnings to qualify. If there was more than 14 horses entered, he was on the outside looking in, and when they went to the 2 divisions, it got him in. And more importantly, he has no points yet. He needs points for the Kentucky Derby, and the Kentucky Derby has allowed them to use full points for both divisions. So another, big plus for Team Baffert, and especially for Charlatan. And I said it when all of this started, there's going to be, a couple horses that this really, really helps. And one of them is Max Bill, and the other one is Charlatan. The one horse is still on the shelf with an injury. Having the later Kentucky Derby date gives him an opportunity to get there. And this horse has the opportunity, only 2 lifetime starts, to get himself into race shape and into the Derby. And with it being in September, this is a horse we remember a few years ago, the horse West Coast. Nobody heard of him during the campaign trail for the Triple Crown, but he became a major player later in the year because he was a late developer. This is what I see with Charlatan, and I think it starts on Saturday in the Arkansas Derby.
Anything to add to that, Chris?
I agree. I think you look at Charlatan, and I think he is he's a standout in this division. I actually think this division of the you mentioned the luck and the good fortune that Bob Baffert had here. I think Charlatan actually drew the weaker of the 2 divisions as well, and certainly the scratch of Shooter Shoot, who ran second to Charlatan back when Charlatan broke maiden back in February. That even helps the pace scenario for him even more, because Shooter Shoot was going to be up near the lead and probably pressing Charlatan a little bit, which could potentially soften him up some for some of the closes. But I think if you compare the 2 fields, I think Charlatan definitely drew the easier of the 2 divisions.
Yeah, I was just texting Marco earlier today about Shooter Shoot getting scratched. He was the one of the ones I circled that I wanted to talk about there, and I guess the horse had a fever, right? And that's why they pulled him from what I read. So that makes it even weaker for the phase 1 race 11 of the Oaklawn Arkansas Derby here. Well, so Charlatan is probably both your favorites, right? That you think they're going to win the race? I'm guessing.
I do.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't see any way that he loses this race. And as Chris said, the key to it is there's going to be no pace in this race now. Because who wants to be the sacrificial lamb to run with him, which is going to let him have, easy fractions on the lead, which is going to make him that much tougher in the stretch. To what already was the weakest of the two divisions, and Chris was being kind and saying, weaker. This is the softest stake race that I have seen, and trust me, I've seen a lot of stake races over my career. It's like they hand seeded it, put all the tough horses in the other race, and because Baffert has two, you got to split the entry up. And okay, Charlie, you only got 2 starts, and you need some points. You're in this one. I mean,
we like to call it filler.
But there are a couple interesting horses in this race, and you've got to get creative on when you're going to have an odds-on horse. You got to find ways to still make money in the race. Now, obviously, the popular wagers, are the pick 4s and pick 5 type races. So it makes it easy for handicappers. Well, this is one race that we know what we're doing. This is our single, which lets us go deeper in in some of the other races. And I'll tell you guys, this one might be a soft race, but you look at the rest of the Oaklawn card on Saturday, this is going to be a tremendous day of racing, given the fact that, it's the only game in town, literally. I mean, there's nothing else to bet on but horse racing, and there's only a handful of tracks that are even going right now. And I was, talking with Kiev and Chris. I'm sure, you're aware of the fact I'm a hardcore horse player. And I hate to admit the fact that I had to look up where Fawner Park was. Okay? All right? I didn't know a Fawner Park, and basically nobody else did either until this year in Will Rogers Downs, because those 2 tracks in Oklahoma and Nebraska continued to race. And Will Rogers the other day had a $6 million handle on a Tuesday. Okay?
Incredible.
Yeah, it's insane. And I own horses. I own harness racing horses, and if my track in Pennsylvania would have stayed open, the Meadows, and because of their schedule, they race 4 days a week in the afternoon on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday. Their Monday and Tuesday cards would have been like Fawner Park in Will Rogers Downs. It would have been a windfall for my track, but they followed the governor of Pennsylvania, which I could go on a whole nother show on that because he has been anti-horse racing from the start. He's actually tried to push a bill through that was taking money from the horsemen to fund something else on his agenda, and he's not in any hurry to help us out and get back to the races. But that, like I said, that's a story for another day. But the money that was, that these small tracks are making right now and making a name for themselves, it's good for them. Kudos to them. Fawner Park, for an example, a couple weeks ago, they had one yesterday, a mandatory payout on a pick 5, but they had a bigger one earlier in the meet, and they started the day with $1.1 million in the carryover. They ended up betting $3.5 million into that pool. It was incredible for them. Or excuse me, I'm sorry, they had a $500,000 start carryover, and they bet $3.5 million that day for a small track like that, which they had never. Their biggest handle ever, even in their heyday, was $1.3 million, and they did $3.5 million in one sequence of racing a pick 5. So kudos, to them. But for the racing on Saturday at Oaklawn, all of the good horses around the country that are in training that, can race and want to get a race in, they're there. I mean, they're full fields in every race. It's going to be a great day of racing, and because it's the only game in town, we're going to get, I talk about this on the Kentucky Derby, Kiev, every year when I do your podcast, the one thing I say is, I bet more money in that one race of the Kentucky Derby with exactas, trifectas, and superfectas simply because there's such an inflated wagering pool because there's novice players betting. And we talk about this all the time. When you're betting sports, you're not betting against, you're betting against the house. That 11-10 edge is what the house has. And you're betting the point spread. You get your point spread, you lock it in when you make the bet. It doesn't change, but you're never going to win more than, the 11-10 unless you're playing a money line dog. In horse racing, you're not betting against the house. The house doesn't care who wins. They make their same amount of money whether a 90-1 shot wins the race or the 2-5 favorite wins the race. They take a percentage of the total handle. The rest of that betting pool is divided up against the winning tickets. So I am now betting against the public. And when you have big events like this, the public, I don't want to sound egotistical, but I'm better than the average Joe betting horses. And that gives me a tremendous edge. And I'm sure Chris would agree that when you've got dead money in a pool, it's like, you guys always joke, I like to eat, I got the belly. You give me a big giant pie, and you put a lot of people in the room that generally don't eat pie, and they're not really intense on getting it, I'm going to get a bigger slice of that, and I'm going for it. And that's what you're going to have on Saturday. This is going to be a mammoth handle, and a lot of dead money going into the pool of people that don't bet horses that'll be betting horses on Saturday.
When Marco starts comparing things to food, you guys better start paying attention here.
That's when my ears perked up.
That's Marco D'Angelo. You can find him on Twitter at Marco in Vegas. Chris, any sleepers here to play under Charlton in this Phase 1 race before we move to Phase 2?
Yeah, I thought two horses at a price that you could use underneath were the 9 winning impression and the 10 crypto cash. Both were prices that I thought had a chance to maybe kick that exacta sum. And Marco hit on like the public. And my guess is that Anu Johor will be a public horse to use underneath. Basin will be a public horse, I think, because of the Steve Asmussen connection that a lot of people will use underneath. So I think you're going to get a little bit of an inflated and overlaid price on winning impression and crypto cash. I mean, crypto cash ran okay in the rush away after blowing the start, and really was only beaten a length for second place, but behind a runaway winner. So I think if you look at McPeak, he has a tendency to run very, very big at big numbers in stakes races. Look up, he won, I believe it was the Holy Bull last year with Harvey Wallbanger at 20-something to 1. He, of course, won the Belmont with Sarava at like 70-1. He's had a couple of other really long-priced winners. So Crypto Gold, I think, is a horse that could run well. And in winning impression, Dallas Stewart's barn started off the Oaklawn meet very, very cold. He hasn't won a lot lately, but he's won a few races and finished in the money in quite a few others. So I think if you look at his MO as well, he's another guy. Big priced horses underneath. Remember, Commanding Curve was a horse that blew up the tote board in the Derby one year. I think that's another horse that you might want to look at and include on your tickets and for exactas and tries.
All right, and that's Chris Fallica. You find him on Twitter at Chris Fallica. Get Marco's plays at wagertalk.com. Let's move on to the next race here. Looks like Nadal here in the Phase 2 part of the Arkansas Derby, which would be race 13 at Oaklawn Park. What are you guys thinking about this field? It's definitely harder from what you're saying. It looks like the Charlton had the easier draw, but you got Nadal. Is he a good favorite there? You can go ahead and start out, Marco.
Yeah, he's earned it. In that last race in the Rebel, he answered 2 key questions, and then he showed me something, a third factor. A lot of people, until a horse races and handles 2 turns, you want to see it. Use the old show me first, and he answered that question. He handled the 2 turns quite easily. The other part is, when we get to this time of the year, you'll hear a lot of people talking about the distances. And because, the Kentucky Derby, in the Belmont, you got 2 longer, races that, these horses haven't, gone yet. People always question, well, is he going to be able to handle the distance? Not only did Nadal handle the distance in his last race, he was run at the entire race. And, being the good horse that he is, he put away that challenger. And so often when a horse does that, it ends up he fights off that first battle, but then it's somebody that comes from just off the pace and presents the second battle for him that ends up wearing the horse down and nips him at the wire. Nadal didn't do that. He held off the second wave, and that really impressed me. And that's the sign, of a horse, of a really good horse. And, I don't want to throw the word out champion there yet, but that is definitely something you want to see. Now, with that said, he's going to face the toughest competition that he has faced, to date. This race is packed with horses that have legitimate shots to win it. And the first horse that I'll start with, and I'm curious to hear Chris's take, because when you have a horse light up the tote board like King Guillermo did, 49-1, there's two schools of thought. Okay, that was a fluke, or was it a fluke, I should say, and then the fact that it happened at Tampa Bay. And if you've been following the racing this meet at Tampa Bay, okay, they've been lighting up the tote board left and right, every single race card, and I really can't put a finger on what it is. And we've seen long shots at all of the tracks, and the simple answer is, these horses, their schedules have gotten disrupted. They're not in the normal pattern. There's horses at Tampa and Gulfstream that should have been in Kentucky right now. They should have been finishing a meet at Keeneland. There should have been horses that were racing in New York, and they're moving across the country because the trainers are having to stay at their main location. There's second trainers involved, and this goes on all the time, but yet when it's the big horses, the trainer's still involved. He's there hands-on. They're not doing their normal procedures getting these horses ready for these races, and in the overnights, we're seeing horses jump up with big races that you look at the line and say, where did that come from? So was that, a legitimate race? And I always like to say it, and I've used the phrase on your podcast before, when you're talking about 3-year-olds, especially 3-year-olds that only have 3, 4, 5 lifetime starts, there is such a room for, them to have that big breakout race. And I like to call it the light bulb race. It's the race that, the light bulb went on and everything clicked. They figured things out. Was his race in the Tampa Bay Derby that light bulb race? And given everything that I have read, seen, and heard from people that, clock the morning workouts, that see the horse on the track, this horse has gotten better since the Tampa Bay Derby, and I'd really like to hear what Chris's thoughts are on him.
Yeah, I think that race, it's always hindsight 2020. You look back at how that happened, and I think this was a horse that really did just get away on the board. I don't know if it was the presence of Solo Volante. I can't remember who else was in. Was Independence Hall in that race too? Maybe that he drew a lot of money.
Thanks, Chris. That's the horse I bet. Thank you for reminding me of that.
Because I'm trying to think back to the race, and I remember looking at, and I'm like, this horse. I think he was only 12-1 or so on the morning line, or 15-1 on the morning line, and just didn't get bet, and I didn't play him. I didn't have him in the race, but then you go back and you look at. I always like to, after a horse like that wins, I like to go back and look and be like, okay, what did I miss? Was this a fluke, or was there something to play with here? And then I think you look and you're like, you know what? There probably was something to play with here. It was a horse that was favored in his debut at Gulfstream. Basically went around the track. Then they put him on the turf, and he aired at 9-2. Then they threw him right into a little stakes race, and he ran a good third against winners in November at Gulfstream on the turf. And then they laid him off, and they put him back in here, and he just got a great pace scenario from the outside and just crushed this field. So I don't think anybody would expected a close to 100 buyer and this horse to pay $100 to win. But I think when you went back and looked, it was clear that there was a little bit of talent there. And he also had another horse. I think he's actually in the Oakland Handicap tomorrow, if I remember correctly. What the heck was the horse's name? So I had him. Trophy Chaser. This was a horse the same trainer, Wanavilla. February 2nd, it was the NHC last chance qualifier, handicapping online qualifier, the week of the NHC. And this horse was 6-1 going into the gate. And it was like, that was the price that I needed in order to get to the qualifying structure. So I bet this horse 6-1 going into the gate. They break the gate 5-2. And it was like, and then the horse wins for fun. So it's like, it makes you think like, all right, like the whole somebody knew something type horse, but this trainer does win quite a bit with some horses, and I'm just curious to see what the pace scenario brings to him Saturday with Nadal, with a horse like Wells Bayou on the outside. I mean, there's more. Does Tyshawn, who's shown some speed at times, go to the front? I wouldn't think so. But there are some other horses in here that like the front. So I wonder if King Guillermo and Nadal, drawn right to his outside, if they kind of knock each other out a little bit, and that might set it up for someone a little bit off the pace.
You know, we had the same conversation somewhat last year with Maximum Security in the Florida Derby, and then he goes into the Kentucky Derby and would have won it, minus that infraction that we've ranted and raved about for a long time. I think Chris actually benefited from that one, by the way.
Oh, I did. Yes, I did.
And, by a lot, actually. It was a very, very large benefit. Let's just put it that way. But either way, Maximum Security, we wondered, Marco said the same thing. Is it real? Is it not? It turned out pretty real, but at the same time, it didn't matter. So good points on that one. Does that mean it's worth trying to beat Nadal, guys?
I think that the pace scenario is going to be a lot tougher. That I think it's going to set up for one of the stalkers. And there's a horse that strikes my. There's two horses. There's a deep closer, and then there's a stalker. The deep closer is Farmington Road. That gives me a little bit of, if they get that fast pace. And I keep looking back to his last race. Now, granted. It was the Oaklawn Stake. It was a $200,000 stake race. There's not horses in that race that, are the caliber that we have here. But the close he made, if you just go back and watch that race again, and I know Chris is probably a guy that loves to, look at replays too. To me, you can read the racing form all day, and although they do great jobs with the racing form, they don't catch everything. You don't see everything. Go back and watch the races for yourself, and just watch how fast this horse was flying. I mean, he was out of it. At one point of the race, he was 17 lengths off of the lead, and Come Flying just got beat a half a length in that race. And if we get some fast fractions, he could be a horse flying at the end, but as you all know, if you bet a deep closer, you're subject to two things in every single race when you bet that horse. One, you need pace, and two, you need a clean trip once you start to make your move. And that's the problem with him, and that's why stalking horses are, a better way to bet, because they don't have to rely totally on a fast pace, and they're never going to have as much road trouble as a stone-cold closer. And to me, the horse that's going to be stalking is Storm the Court. This is going to be a horse that'll be just off the pace. I think he'll probably be sitting third, fourth, or fifth in this race. And I know his first two races of the season weren't what everybody expected. But this will be the third start off the layoff. And I can tell you from my dealings with horse racing, the third start off of a layoff is the one where the horse is going to be the tightest. I know they get these horses ready for these races, but you can't get them to actual race speed and conditioning without actually having the races. That's what really tightens these horses up, and that third one is the best. But I'm going to go back to, if you go to his races last year, and obviously his claim to fame was the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, and that, as it does every year, whoever wins that Breeders' Cup race is automatically stamped as one of the favorites for the Kentucky Derby the following year. that race has proven to be somewhat of a jinx moving into the next season. I don't know if it's because it takes so much out of the 2-year-old, because he did race late into the season. You're racing in November, and then they came back, they quit after that race, but they came back in February with their first start, because in February we thought everything was going to be going according to plan with the Kentucky Derby, and you have to get your horse ready for the Kentucky Derby and have those couple prep races. I just don't think the horse was on his best game yet in this third start. We'll see that. And I think that he is a horse that really intrigues me, which will be a nice mid-range price where, Chris likes, looking for the value. I think this horse will be a horse that's going to float around that 6 to 8 to 9 to 1 range. That gets me interested highly.
Storm the Court, that last one?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thought so. When you're talking Breeders' Cup Juvenile. Okay, well, that's great. And would he be your sleeper then to hit the board? I know you gave us Sir Winston last year for the as your sleeper for the Belmont, which happened to hit very well. Who is that? Would that be your sleeper?
Him and Farmington Road, I think, are intriguing horses. If this race falls apart, I like them as horses that are going to be making a run. Wells Bayou is a horse that, because he has the outside post, this is a horse that's improving. Don't get me wrong. I like him. In fact, I had him on top in his last race. But he's going to get locked into that speed duel, and I just don't think he's going to have enough left with the other two horses that are going to be up there battling. So I think this might set up for a horse off the pace, and that's where I'm looking for some value, and Farmington Road and Storm the Court fit the bill.
Chris, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I totally agree with Farmington Road. I think that race, the only concern I have is from that outside post. Is he going to suffer the same fate that he has the previous couple of races, getting kind of hung out there and just run so much further than the other horses in the race, and he comes up just a little bit short. But I'm still going to use him because the price is definitely going to be right, and probably as good of a price as you ever get on a Todd Pletcher horse in a stakes race like this. So I think he's someone you definitely should have on your ticket. Silver Prospector, I think, is a horse that you might want to take a look at as well. He seems to be like a very versatile type horse. He's run up close to the lead. He's come from off the pace. Had a little bit of trouble in the last race at Oaklawn. I don't think he was going to win, but I think Steve Asmussen's horse there was definitely worth using. The one horse that I really, really was going to want to play in this race, but he's going to scratch from what I gather, was Fast Enough. This horse ran in the San Vicente out at Santa Anita against Nadal in his last race, and was only beaten a couple of lengths. I think this start off of that layoff against Nadal, the added ground and the type of trip that I thought he would have gotten would have really benefited him in this race, but unfortunately, Fast Enough is getting struck. So I think the two horses I'm going to key around in with Exact are going to be Farmington Road and Silver Prospector. I'll key those two horses in one spot in the Exacta, and then play some other horses in the second set. So Silver Prospector or Farmington Road hit the board. I want to walk away.
So you're including Nadal, right?
Yes, I'm going to include Nadal. And, include King Guillermo. I'll probably include Wells Bayou just because I didn't include Wells Bayou last time, and it blew up my pick 5 with Fred Grounds. That horse, I guess, was the worst kept secret on the board. I just couldn't take the perceived number on that horse to what he was in the morning line, but he won for fun and was so much the best. I was kicking myself for not using him last time. So I'll use those 3. I'll probably find a couple of more prices in there to use as well.
All right. Well, there you go. I don't think we have to go through the throwouts in these races. You guys pretty much covered it pretty well. Obviously, check Marco at Wager Talk for his information on Saturday. That's when he's going to have that out. And obviously, follow Chris on Twitter. He always likes to throw out some of the things that he's doing, guys. So the card you said looks amazing. Lots of competition on it. Is there anything else you want to add, or any races or any horses you want to throw in there? You can go ahead and start, Chris.
Yeah, I actually haven't broken down the entire card yet. I've been so busy with with the Thursday card, and I wanted to make sure I got the 3-year-old race done for you and some other people that I've been talking with. But I think that Oakland handicap race is going to be a really good race as well. Marco hit on. I mean, just thumbing through the card, full fields, good betting races. I'm looking forward to the card. I think if you looked at Oakland handicap, Improbable, who ran a great race in his last race with that post at Oakland, drew a far outside post again. So I don't know what Improbable did to piss the people that draw the fields in Oklahoma. What he did to them to deserve that, but we'll see if he can overcome that. But I think with Improbable and combatant and trophy chaser, like I had mentioned, I think Pavazzo is in that field. That's another really good competitive race.
And Marco, what are your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are that I am glad that I am going to be singling Charlatan in race 11 because I'm going to be going very, very deep in race 12. I can tell you that. The 12th race is going to be, I think, the spotlight race of the day. Even though the two big races are the Arkansas, Derby races, this race is going to be, I think, the most competitive race, and you can make a case for half of the field winning the race. And with the price that we're going to have with the pick 4 on Saturday, the late pick 4, they bunched it together perfectly to try to make it the toughest to handicap. And normally, and Chris, when you look at the that last pick 4 on any racetrack, they always give you either maiden races, which can be the toughest because you have no knowledge. Most of the horses, a lot of times, maybe you're making their first or second start. You don't have anything to go with, or you get a cheap claiming race where everybody's about the same caliber, and it comes down to trip and so forth. So you make your tickets wider in those races to try to get the coverage, and they put together the final 3 races on the card with the second leg of the Arkansas Derby being so competitive that Oakland handicap, and then you throw in the finale is no cinch either. This is going to be a fun late pick 4, and you could get some big balloons. And as guys that bet horse racing, that's what we're looking for, some big balloon payouts.
I'd even think of that. Race 12 is going to be huge when it comes to these pick 3s, pick 4s, and pick 5s, going from phase 1 to phase 2, race 11 to race 13. Make or break in that race. So very interesting. Chris, do you have any thoughts?
No, I'm good. It's not going to end this weekend, unfortunately, it looks like, because Churchill's going to start back up again. I saw the governor there gave them a go-ahead to race without fans. And then from what I gather, Santa Anita is going to be starting back up pretty soon as well. So once Oakland ends this weekend, we'll have a little bit of a respite, and then we'll be able to start right back up again with Churchill and hopefully Santa Anita, and be able to get us through the next month or so.
All right, well, that's all the time we have. Thank you guys so much for coming back on. We really appreciate your insights. Make sure you check out Wager Talk for the plays this weekend for this card, and check them out on YouTube for Pony Pundits airing on Friday. Make sure you check out Chris's articles on ESPN, not only in college football, but in horse racing. Have a fantastic rest of your week. Remember to be safe and always go get some winners.